and exactly what those are, in this area or that area, in this detail or that detail, that's to be determined. But I think that this is a general approach for going about thinking about and designing innovative, transformative change. Okay, so what I would like Johan, if he comes on board, what I would like him to do with me is to look at the statistics in Norwalk and show exactly where we're coming up short in education, in healthcare, in housing, um, even with the epidemic of opioids. I think that there's a lot of things that that sh- that that could be done, that should be done, and I actually think that it's possible. I don't know how long this would take, but I actually think it's possible, and this is a start, and this is a model for doing other stuff too. I actually think it's possible to take a city like Norwalk and transform it into a city where ev- where um, kids in the lower SES graduate from high school at the same rate as the kids in the upper SES, and go to college and go to Ivy League schools and and get good jobs and find affordable housing and live a good life. I think that it's possible um, for every single resident of Norwalk to live a good life in a safe community, live healthy, um, and have meaningful jobs and have a good life in a good community. I think that's possible. Um, but I want to work with Johan to put together some statistics to show how much farther we've got to go to make something like that happen. Um, okay, so the next one, there's a guy named David Berto. David Berto is a developer. I think he does mostly housing, maybe some commercial stuff. He developed the first co-housing uh, development that's going. I think it's being constructed down in Connecticut. Um, but he spent decades on affordable housing. He works a lot with nonprofits. Um, so I want to see if I can persuade him to join us. Um, and I can imagine using his expertise for various problems involved with development, especially um, ordinances and regulations and um, how to either meet existing ordinances or press for variances. Um, um, so, and the next one is I don't know her full name. Her first name is Diami. She is with Appleseed Appleseed Permaculture. Now, Appleseed Permaculture, besides David Berto, Appleseed Permaculture helped design the this co-housing development here in Connecticut. So, along permaculture principles. So, so I'm hoping to get her involved to guide us. Number one, in making sure that as the design progresses, it progresses along permaculture principles, not and uses permaculture design principles like being very focused on energy flows and energy efficiency, and obviously alternative energy, and also this design principle of packing functions, layering them into um, on top of each other. Like when you do one thing, you do two or three things. When you solve one problem, you solve two or three other problems at the same time. They all interconnect and fit together and layer on each other. Um, so, and there's other. I mean, I haven't studied permaculture, so I'm sure that and you know, I will as part of this project if it goes forward. But I think that her guidance would be very helpful along those lines. And the last one is Joyce Rosenthal. Joyce Rosenthal is a childhood friend of my wife, and I've become friends with her over the years, over the decades. And Joyce, she was an environmental activist for years and years. She started out as, I think she was like one of Ralph Nader's first secretaries, and then she worked with Barry Commoner, and she went to Germany and worked with the Greens out over there. And so for years and years, she was a very effective environmental activist. And then she went to Columbia, I guess, and got some degrees in, I don't know what, urban planning, I'm not sure. And then she went to Harvard and was an assistant professor for a couple of years, I think, in urban planning. And not just, urban planning is another area that I haven't studied that I want to study as part of this, but I think that contemporary urban planning is very much oriented towards environmental issues. And I think that Joyce can give us guidance on leading edge urban planning issues, approaches. And then I'm thinking that you know, if all this works, then we can go together to the mayor and convince him to let us go forward with this, to go forward with planning and implementing this kind of like process of even as the mall is being constructed, to go forward with plans for gradually transforming it into a very different kind of thing. A complex, is that the word I want? A complex? I don't know. So we want to transform the mall as it will be built over the next few years. Even as it's being built, we can design its transformation, then begin to implement its transformation into a multi-use complex that's really oriented towards being a space, a bunch of functions, a community that can really thrive and kind of be Norwalk's center of life, and reach out to the whole city, and revitalize the whole city. So where am I? So the last video ended up where? So the last video ended up. I was beginning to talk about pitching myself. Okay, so here's the thing: each of these 7 people have to be appealed to. I think not only on the well-being of, I would say, the main stakeholders. Okay, first of all, there's two aspects to this. One is what's going to happen in Norwalk, and one is a model, a generalizable model for let's say innovative change of any kind, and the main stakeholders in Norwalk are the residents of Norwalk. The main stakeholders in the generalized model is like everyone in the world, but also this in Norwalk we'll be looking at like a long-term project. So this is going to be over the next several decades, okay? Over the next several decades, but a model for innovative social, a generalized model for innovative social change, okay? To me, this, well, for me, let me see. So there's, so the stakeholders, the project has two aspects: a local and a global aspect, okay, or a local urban development project and a generalized model. Okay, those are the two aspects of the project. Now, and the stakeholders on the ground are people, okay, the residents of Norwalk, everybody in the world. But the stakeholders, but we seven will be stakeholders in the sense that we will have, we may not even benefit from any of this personally ourselves. So we have to have more at stake than the well-being of the citizens of Norwalk or the citizens of the world. That may be enough, but I think that many of us have to have something more personal at stake. And I've already talked about for Mark McCrate it being the challenge of working on some of these engineering problems, and other ones will have other stakes in the project. For me, I want this to create a generalized model of innovative change. Okay, this to me is a major motivating factor, because this is kind of I want to convince myself that all that I've been doing since I joined SDS in 1965 and worked with the Greens in the 80s and with Occupy Wall Street and with the Bernie people, everything I've been doing in writing 2 books, so everything I've been doing for the last half century or so, I want to be able to put it all into this. I want to be able to say this project can be the culmination of basically my life's work. So when I make the pitch to myself, I want to make that case. I want to make the case that in order to do that, I think what I'm going to try to do is try to condense all my past work into a kind of like into a kind of like mini magnum opus. A magnum opus is one's major work. I want, and I've written 2 books. I don't want to write a 3rd book. I thought of doing a series of YouTube videos. I gave up on that. I've thought of writing another book. I was going to write a book called Morphin Triage. Morphin Triage as metaphors for different ways of doing things. Morphing instead of, let's say, disruptive revolution. And triage, I'll get into that another time, but triage is another metaphor for how to organize organizations, how to organize politics, economics, how to organize society. I think triage is a metaphor for a certain kind of organizing. I'll get into that later, but the point being that as part of my pitch to myself, I'm going to create a mini magnum opus that will condense all of my prior work into the